Hello, friends. How are you? It's Mr. McKinney here with Mr. McKinney's Historic Houston. Excited for another show that we do every single Thursday at 7 o'clock right here at the Heritage Society, live from the Heritage Society. Of course, tonight we've got with us a very special guest. It's actually a gentleman named Gary White. You're going to learn all about Houston cemeteries with Gary White shortly. But as we always do, before we get started, we want to make sure we invite Allison Bell, our executive director. Say hello to Allison Bell. Come on down. There she is.
Voting picture.
Yes, it's your voting photo. Zoom in the voting photo real quick. Look at that voting photo, her sticker, I voted. How about that? Look at that. Well, glad you voted, of course. And let's get started because we're excited to have our show on tonight. We always talk about events that are coming up at the Heritage Society, and one of them is actually
Our SIP.
Tomorrow
night.
Yes, tomorrow night. Here it is. So talk about the SIP series real quick and what we're going to be doing tomorrow night and how the public can get involved.
Sure. Tomorrow is our first SIP that we're bringing back after COVID. We're very excited. It'll be held in the ballroom on the Bayou, which is a huge ballroom that holds 1,000 people, so we will be able to physically distance. SIPs stands for See Interesting Places, so we like to go to historic buildings or homes, and the host usually tells us about their home and the wonderful architect and whatnot. So this is the Albert Thomas Convention Center that was the convention center before the George R. Brown, and Albert Thomas, you will find out tomorrow night. We have a special speaker who's going to tell you the history of Albert Thomas and
Zoom in. Check out that room that's over there too.
He made to the city of Houston and all the people that he hung out with. So his office can be seen, a private tour only, if you are able to come to our SIP tomorrow. It's from 5:30 to 8:30. You can get tickets on our website, heritagesociety.org, or you can reach out to our development director, Laura Woods, and get a ticket. It's a great price. You get cocktails and snacks and
And you always learn about history
Yes.
at the Heritage Society. So we're going to talk about the legacy of Albert Thomas, who, of course, is the namesake for this space. Many people don't know the legacy of Albert Thomas, but you're going to find out by none other than
a surprise guest.
a surprise guest. And, of course, he was the gentleman, he was a U.S. congressman here in our area, in our region as well, but he also was really involved with JFK, bringing him to Houston on a number of occasions, and especially to advocate for our area, including the space program, which you're going to learn all about. And he was on the plane with LBJ and Jackie O when LBJ was sworn in. So that's another interesting fact you're going to find out about. So don't miss out. Once again, tomorrow, Thursday, starting at 5:30 p.m., you go to heritagesociety.org to get tickets for the event, and you'll get to go inside the really cool special office of Albert Thomas. Now, what else is happening at the Heritage Society?
So we continue our women's suffrage exhibit celebrating 100 years of the women's right to vote. We actually had a private tour today at 4 p.m. A lady brought 10 of her friends, when you can socially distance in the museum as well, had a private tour with Ann Sloan, one of the co-curators of the museum.
Wow.
If you're not comfortable coming out, you can go online and purchase a virtual tour for a whopping $5, which is the same price you would pay if you came into the museum. And the virtual tour takes you panel by panel through the exhibit, and you can zoom in and read close up from the comfort of your home.
There you go. Oh, there you are.
There we
Look
are
at that.
on your bus.
On the Houston History Bus, we're still doing tours on the bus, which, of course, is about haunted Houston. So tune in if you want to come join us. It's an opportunity to get on board the bus and learn about Houston history from a haunted perspective.
So much fun, and you learn so much.
Absolutely. So join us. There's a couple more seats left over for the tour that we're going to be doing on Friday and on Saturday, and even one on Sunday. Prizes, our favorite part now. Prizes, Let's talk about them.
So last week, we had Robert Sakowitz. I hope many of you got to watch. I know we had some technical difficulties, which we are fixing tonight. But he was fascinating. He talked about the history of the Sakowitz Brothers retail store that actually started
in Galveston in 1902.
It was in New York, and before that it was...
lots of history.
He just went on with all the history. He was fabulous, wonderful, and we celebrated his birthday. So... Is this the first question?
Yes.
All right. The first question, where was the first ever Sakowitz location? And the answer, are you telling him or am I telling the answer?
Oh, you're telling the answer, yeah.
All right. The answer is Galveston, And the winner is a woman named Regina Seal.
Yeah, Regina Seal, really active with the Astrodome Conservancy, really active with Save the Astrodome efforts too. Yeah, Regina Pappas Seal, great. Yeah, she really got involved. Yes, Pappas. Yeah, how about that?
That's great.
Okay, second question. Good job, Regina. Thanks for tuning in, by the way. We appreciate it.
Who was instrumental in expanding Sakowitz to the Houston location on Main and Rusk? And the answer is Jesse Jones.
Jesse H. Jones. We learned about this from Robert Sakowitz himself, talking about how his father got asked personally by Jesse H. Jones, we need you as an anchor in the brand new 1929 Gulf building, right?
Yes.
And who got the answer right?
Marcia Lutz.
There you go. Marcia Lutz got the answer right.
A weekly watcher.
Okay.
We love it. All right, the next one. What was the name of the person from Boston who convinced them to go into Gulf Gate?
He had a very thick Boston accent. Robert Sakowitz was commenting on that. Actually, even did an impression of the gentleman.
Oh, he did.
Which is really neat. Yes. So how he kind of lured his father also to go into Gulf Gate, and that was a good move for them to expand beyond downtown. So let's see who that is.
Mr. Berenson.
Okay, that's the answer. And who's the winner?
Sandra Lord, your buddy
Sandra Lord got it right. Good job, Sandra Lord. Okay, there she goes. Proud of her for that.
That's right.
Paying attention. Okay, our fourth question.
How many Sakowitz locations on Main Street were there? And for some reason, nobody got this right. And I don't even know she didn't tell me what the answer is.
So I think, this is a time that we had two questions asked, I believe. So I think we might have answered that question. But the question that people were chiming in for was how many Sakowitz brothers were there? That's the fourth question that we're asking you today. And the answer?
2.
There were 2. Okay, 2 original Sakowitz brothers. Okay, and that's the answer to the question.
And then he talked about.
And then who got it right? I don't think anybody got it right.
Nobody got it right.
No, they were chiming in with different answers. So we're going to leave that one alone because no one got it right. But that was 2 questions that we asked, one and then the other. So we'll keep going on. Okay, our fifth and final question.
What was the thing that his father loved so much that he created an entire department for?
So what was the thing that Robert Sakowitz's father loved so much, Bernard, that he created an entire department for? What's the answer?
Dark chocolate.
Dark chocolate. You're right. Okay, and who was the winner?
We kind of had a tie, so we have to figure that out. There were a couple of ties. It might be Marcia again. I don't know yet.
We'll figure it out, okay? But that's the answer is dark chocolate. If you're at home curious now, wanting to know what the answer is is dark chocolate. Okay. All right. Thank you again to Allison Ayers-Bell.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us. Executive Director for the Heritage Society. You will see her tomorrow night at the SIP series. So come join her. I've got my ticket. You should get your ticket as well. Okay, we're going to head over now to the studio and get ready for the rest of our show. So here we go. Let's see what else we got on the screen. Put this down. Switch out. All right. Who's tuning in, by the way? Look at this. We got some great people tuning in. So if you're there right now tuning in, please let us know. Please chime in. Let me see. Who do we have with us? Marcia Lutz is joining us once again. Sharon Newhouse is joining us. Phil Brayton says you both look fabulous. The Tan Man himself says we both look fabulous. Cindy Stevenson says hello as well. Michael Powell, Scott Talley. Laura Woods, our awesome Director of Development, is also tuning in from home. There she is. And then Catherine, Jeannie Deal. Oh, gosh, lots of Eric Romo just joined us. So thank you so much for chiming in. And give us a like, by the way. When you give us a like, it actually increases the momentum on Facebook, and they show it to David Flores just chimed in. He's watching now. Hey, David, what's going on? Okay, once again, thank you to Allison Ayers-Bell. Thank you, by the way, also to Kirksey Gregg, who is making the studio possible for us. The one you saw earlier, Kirksey Gregg Productions LLC, has been very kind to be able to transform our tea room into the space that you see now. So I want to say thank you to him for that and his company, and you'll get to learn more about that, or at least see it in action, over at the event that we're doing tomorrow, the 29th, at the Bayou Place, the ballroom at the Bayou Place. There it is. Thank you again, by the way, to Robert Sakowitz for really taking us on a journey through Houston's famed Sakowitz department store. We really appreciate it. He actually stayed afterwards. He hung out with Minette Basel, our board president, hung out with Allison Bell and Laura Woods, our director of development, shared a glass of wine, and just really told some great stories. So it was kind of a bonus. I wish you guys were there, but it was a wonderful opportunity to learn more about Robert Sakowitz, and even hung out with our staff, too. There's Isaac Saravi, our lead camera guy for the show. And next now, on November 4th at 7 o'clock, we're going to have, by the way, a really special guest. His name is Steve Curry. You might know Steve Curry, talking about Houston mid-century architecture. He's going to be on the show next Wednesday at 7 o'clock, okay? Next Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Do not miss out. He's with Houston Mod. You probably all know about Houston Mod, and hopefully if you don't, you're going to learn more about it. Houston Mod and Mr. McKinney's Historic Houston did a really cool event last week that's on YouTube. It's about taking you inside this beautiful house, this historic 1956 house that Houston Mod did a Mod of the Month for. So really excited to have Steve Curry come talk about modern architecture, just like what you're seeing right now, right here. And it's on YouTube, by the way, Mr. McKinney's Historic Houston YouTube page. And speaking of YouTube, I want to make sure if you missed last week's show with Robert Sakowitz, you go to the Heritage Society's YouTube page because they've got some really great past talks about the history of Houston, okay? So once again, if you miss Sandra Lord, if you miss Robert Sakowitz, you can go there and check out past episodes on the Heritage Society's YouTube page. There it is. Please go ahead and subscribe to our page. We don't have that many subscribers. We need more, and when you do that, you'll learn about the great videos that we have all throughout. Okay, more videos, by the way, on architecture, videos about the houses, videos about the history tours and African-American history, all on the Heritage Society's YouTube page. All right. Speaking of social media, please make sure you like and follow Mr. McKinney's Historic Houston and the Houston History Bus. We really appreciate it. It's how you learn about these live shows that we do. We do a variety of live shows, including here at the Heritage Society. So if you want to tune in and check it out, you might as well like the page real quick so you can learn more about what we're doing here in Houston history. Okay. Oh, wow. Kirk just joined us. Thanks, Kirk, for watching and chiming in. We also do free tours, by the way, on board the Houston History Bus, so we always encourage you to like and follow our social media page so you can join us on a free tour on board the Houston History Bus. All right. And that's it. If you want more information about that, certainly give us a call. The information is right there for you to have. Let's see what else we got. And lastly, we want to get started by inviting our special guest. Gary White is a longtime docent and volunteer with the Heritage Society. He works for Waste Management, but he really focuses on Houston cemeteries. He's been doing this since 1985, and we're going to welcome on the show Gary White. Come on out, Gary White. Here he is. Hello, sir. Look at that.
Good evening.
Good evening. I'm going to give you the microphone. That's for you to have.
All right.
Good to see you, sir. Have a seat right there. Absolutely. Well, Gary White, you're going to take us on a journey through Houston cemeteries, right?
At least a few of them.
A few. We don't have enough for all the time. We're going to do a few of them, too. That's okay. There you go. All right. Okay. That's perfect.
All right.
Yes, we have like that. Okay. Well, let's talk about the first. First off, how did you get involved, with Houston cemeteries, county cemeteries? How did it all start?
Everybody that goes in cemeteries.
I'm going to fix one thing real quick for the betterment of everybody. I'm going to fix this up real quick. There we go. The
All right.
mic will be good. And are we good, too, on your end over there, Keith? Okay, great. All right. Go for it. How did you get started?
Everybody that goes into cemeteries is working on their genealogy. And that's where it started for me in about 1985. I got more familiar with some of the cemeteries around town. Took a tour from a gentleman who was doing cemetery tours at the time. And at the end of the tour, he says, I'm retiring, and you seem to be very knowledgeable about this. Would you like to take over? So for the next 23 years, I did the cemetery tours that he had done previously.
Look at that. Now, tell people, too, over the years, what's one of your favorite cemeteries? We're going to get to all of them, though, but what's one that you really kind of connect with? And any relatives maybe buried in one locally close by?
Probably the one that I enjoy the most is Glenwood. And that's probably everyone's favorite unless you've got a lot of folks in another cemetery around, because it has something for everybody. It has governors. It has previous presidents of the republic. It has actresses and actors. It has oil people. It has medical folks. So it's pretty well covers the whole gamut of people that were instrumental in founding and in creating this city.
I like that. Well, let's do this then. Let's go ahead and dive right in. We're going to get started and take you to take us to our very first Harris County area cemetery called
Glendale. And Glendale is actually the oldest cemetery within the city limits. It predates the city by about 5 years. It was originally the Harris family cemetery because this is at Harrisburg, just out near the ship channel. And when they got their league, when we were still, even before Republic, the Mexican government gave them a league of land. They founded a cemetery, their own little family cemetery on the northeast corner of it. As things went on, it became Glendale, and actually some of the Harris family is still buried there. Although John Harris, who founded Harrisburg and was instrumental in this, is buried in New Orleans.
So, besides the Harris family, is there anybody else of notoriety at Glendale?
There's two or three. Everybody knows Allens, but this isn't the Allen brothers. He's not a relationship at all. Samuel Allen.
The rancher.
The rancher.
The rancher. Highway Galveston Road, right? Is big.
Well, most of modern day Pasadena is on the Allen Ranch.
And boy, we lost that big mansion, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Oh man.
But that's one. There are others. This is a monument to John Richardson Harris, and this is actually the family plot of the Harris family. And as I said, he's not there. He died in New Orleans in 1831 and was buried in New Orleans until his family really started to develop the property about a year later. Harrisburg really wasn't going to survive, but fortunately it did. Sidney Sherman. If you go across the Ship Channel Bridge, you'll notice it's named the Sidney Sherman Bridge.
Absolutely.
And the reason for that is the house that Sidney Sherman lived in is actually on the northwest corner of the cemetery property, or was. It, along with everything in Harrisburg, including the Harris house, would burn to the ground in the runaway scrape in April of 1836. And the government of the Republic of Texas at that time had come in. They stopped there, found out that Santa Anna's army was about a day behind them, hopped in a boat, and Santa Anna wrote in one of his officers wrote in his diary that they watched the Texas government row across the bay. That's how close they came to capturing the Republic government at that point.
Sidney Sherman, and like you said, a hero for the Battle of San Jacinto. Very active. So Bob Pando just chimed in. By the way, one of our board members, Bob Pando, just chimed in. Rebecca Rowland is in. Wendy Barron. T.T. Rhyme. So, lots of fun folks are chiming in. Make sure you give us a like, by the way. Give us a heart and a like so we know that you're there. Well, let's keep going on. Our next cemetery we got to talk about is
Founders. Now, until 1936, Founders was actually city cemetery. It was the first cemetery close to downtown. It was founded in 1837, early 37. And it was where a lot of the original founders of the city were originally buried. For instance, John Kirby Allen, one of the two Allen brothers that founded the city, is buried there. His brother, Augustus, is not. He is in Greenwood Cemetery in New York. But his parents are there, his brother is there. John Austin Horton, who was the adjutant general for Sam Houston's army. His claim to fame was being there, and he died about 4 years after the revolution was over. And this is William Gamble. Now, Mr. Gamble is rather interesting for unusual reasons. He was a Scotsman. He was part of the army of San Jacinto. And for a long time, people thought he was buried there. But he wasn't. Finally, they did the research and found out that he was actually buried in Sam Houston Park originally, and was moved over to Washington Cemetery in the early 1900s.
And you're going to talk about it a little later on. Before we end, we're going to talk about what was here at Sam Houston
Absolutely.
Park and what is no longer here, and then even some fun facts and things that happened later on. Well, let's keep going. And a cemetery that's right next to Founders is
Beth Israel. That is the oldest Jewish cemetery in the state of Texas. It was founded in 1844, and actually, when they founded it, they asked the city if the city would sell them a little bit of the land on City Cemetery, because they are right next door. So Beth Israel expanded, City did not. And that's pretty much where it is today. And to play off something that you said a little earlier, one of the plots in Beth Israel is the Sakowitz plot.
There you go.
Along with people like Ben Taub, the Taub plot, the Schnitzers, development people, the Myers of the Foley's fame. their family plots are all in that cemetery.
All these early, Jewish pioneers too, that kind of were
Yes.
merchants and were involved in our city in the early days, are located there. And here's a great view of Israel Cemetery. And the cemetery goes back to what, 1853?
1844.
1844. So it goes back pretty far in the city's past. Yeah, look at that. This cemetery is probably one of the most famous ones here in Houston, okay?
Absolutely.
Talk about this iconic, famous cemetery.
This is Glenwood. Glenwood was started in 1871. There were burials in it. It was a corporation. And about 1892, it went into receivership because it was being managed so badly. Stayed that way for about 3 years, and then came back out after they got a new manager and a new company, and it has been Houston's premier cemetery almost ever since. Anybody who is everybody was in that cemetery.
Including?
This is the Cooley plot. This is where Denton Cooley is. And if you ever go out to the medical center, you'll happen to notice that in front of the Texas Heart Institute is this same sculpture, much larger. He liked it so well that he had one put in his cemetery plot. One of my favorite places. This is called Celebrity Corner, and it's that way for a reason. Now, this is one of the Lee plots. This happens to be W. Howard Lee. His brother William is behind him with a much bigger headstone. But some of the folks in here, right up at the front of these little small ones, and may I point?
Yeah, absolutely.
This one right here. When you go into it, you're going to find that you've come across Jean Tierney, the actress. She was married to Oleg Cassini for quite a while, had a couple of daughters with Oleg, divorced him, and came to Houston as the bride of W. Howard Lee. No, yes. And
they lived in River Oaks, and they were,
they stayed here. They were socialized, and one of her comments at one time was she would much rather go be a Houstonian and be in the social circles in Houston than she ever did in Hollywood. She's most famously known for The Ghost and Mrs. Muir. She did win one Academy, but not for that one. Others in this same plot is her brother-in-law or her nephew. And he was known as the King of the Wildcatters. And I'm sorry, Mr. Hal Booty, that's not the case. This guy was a little bit before you. Glenn McCarthy is also buried just right next to her. And interestingly enough, they're not all that connected. Glenn McCarthy was married to Faustine Lee, who was William Lee's daughter. They had 8 kids. And besides creating and losing 8 different fortunes, he owned things like KPRC for a while, KPRC radio. He owned Eastern Airlines, among others.
All the citizen newspapers, he owned the whole conglomerate of that, and KXYZ, news as well, and radio as well, too. So he's just somebody who, most people know him for his iconic
oil wells.
Yes, and the famous on Main and Holcomb,
the
Shamrock Hotel.
Well, the Shamrock, yes. When he started that, or when he built that in 1949, it had 65 colors of green.
That's right, different shades.
Now it's, I think, on the property is now used by Texas A&M's nursing school.
And you know what's so great is what they did was, it was a parking lot. It was demolished in June of 1987, and then it was a parking lot for a while. And then now it's actually been reused as a school. So it's the DeBakey School for Health Professions. It's the high school for health professions, Michael DeBakey School. They moved from 288 right there into that property. So at least it's getting, and the parking garage is still there, as we all know.
And at one time, the swimming pool for the Shamrock was still under the parking lot.
Yeah.
But then right behind this, right behind that, you can't see it real well, but just right around this corner about 10 feet, is Colonel Benjamin Terry.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Benjamin Terry was a Houstonian. 1862, he created his own cavalry regiment. He recruited them, he equipped them, and away they went to Kentucky, where he was killed in his first battle at Perryville. And a lot of people don't know who the 8th Texas Cavalry is. But if you say Terry's Texas Rangers, people kind of remember. But that's why that's called Celebrity Corner. There's so many things within 10 feet of each other right there.
I love that. Well, speaking of celebrities, we've got a real big one. Talk about who's buried here.
Who is that?
Well, people didn't know for a while. It wasn't really marked for a while, right? I mean, talk about this space.
He died in the air. He actually died on his way back to Houston to the medical center. And of course, this is Howard Hughes. Hughes grew up in a couple of places, one in a house very near where University of St. Thomas is now, and also in an apartment in what's the
Beaconsfield.
The Beaconsfield.
The Beaconsfield, you're right. That's a beautiful apartment 2A. My buddy owns the apartment, and the floor. There's a button that's on the floor that you can hit, and that's what Mr. Howard Hughes Sr. would use to call the wait staff to come in. So it's really neat. But yeah, the Beaconsfield.
And interestingly, he told a story that he and his mother stayed in the tub in the bathroom for a day and a half during the Camp Logan riots in 1917 because they were so scared they didn't want to come out of the hotel. He also was very good friends, or his dad was, with the gentleman that owned Bland Cadillac. And at 16, he convinced his dad to buy him a Cadillac. He brought it home, took it all apart, every single piece, put it all back together, and gave it back to Mr. Bland. He only wanted to see how it was made. Now, he is there. His parents are also there with him.
Just an example of the statuary that's all throughout Glenwood. I mean, really, there's some really amazing pieces. This angel over here, and there's quite a few angels, though, but this is from the Hill family, but just a really piece of beautiful statuary that you're going to see all throughout Glenwood Cemetery.
That was called the Weeping Angel.
Weeping Angel. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Now, next door is what other cemetery?
Washington. Originally, 1887, it was created as Deutsche Gesellschaft der Houston, which was the German cemetery, the German Society Cemetery. That name was changed to Washington in 1918 for obvious reasons. And it's a rather interesting cemetery as well. It was in disrepair for years, decades. And in about 1998, Glenwood took over management of it. It became part of Glenwood's perpetual care program, although it is still known as Washington next door. Now, you remember when we were looking at founders?
Yes.
There was a Gamble.
Yes.
That wasn't really there. Well, he really is in Washington. That's where he was moved to, and from Sam Houston Park in 1900. And his wife was also buried there in 1908. Now, this is an interesting one, and it's this headstone right here. That was a soldier in the Union Army. This is a Union Army plot. This is one of the GAR plots. And it turns out that his name was Emma Seeley. She is the only woman ever given a federal pension for soldier service in the Civil War. She was a corporal in the 2nd Michigan, and for 2.5 years, she was able to deceive everyone in her unit that she was actually a woman. She only had to leave when she got ill and was afraid that they would discover her. She moved back to Houston. She married a gentleman here in Houston, lived in LaPorte. When she died, she was buried in LaPorte in 1900. The GAR post here knew who she was because she had been a member of that post. They didn't feel that was a significant place for her. So in 1903, they had a procession from LaPorte to this cemetery to reinter her in their plot here, and it was with full honors. So that's the only female Union soldier. Anson Jones. Anson Jones was the last president of the Republic of Texas, and he was moved to Glenwood from right across the street. He was in the Masonic Cemetery that was here in Sam Houston Park and was moved to that. He was the first Grand Master of the Masonic Lodges in Texas. He when he ran for president of the republic, and he is the last president, there were two other gentlemen who were running against him. Well, by the time the election occurred, he was the only one left. The other two had committed suicide. One by shooting themselves on Main Street, the other by drowning themselves in Galveston Bay.
And he's on our Haunted Houston tour because he actually, and
He
speaking
also-
of, at the Rice Hotel.
He actually, at the end of his
Yeah.
lifetime, committed suicide himself in 1858.
Yeah, it's tragic. This cemetery is often overlooked. Talk about this, and I love the postcard, by the way, because it just takes us back to a different time. This is Lake Drive at Hollywood Cemetery. Talk about the history, a little bit of Hollywood Cemetery on I-45 North in North Main. Talk about it.
Hollywood was started in the late 1890s. And for a long time, you came in off of Fulton. You didn't come in off of Main Street like you do now. The backside of it is really where the historical people started. Among the folks in there are Julia Idison, who was the first Houston librarian, and who named and helped design the original Houston Library, the Idison building.
Yeah, and she's actually on. What's neat is too, her dress is on loan from the San Jacinto Museum to the Heritage Society. It's in our museum now. So if you come by to check out the Women's History exhibit, you'll see her beautiful white dress. And you'll learn about why it's a white dress and the importance of it, and really her work in the suffrage movement when you come by and check out the awesome exhibit we have here. So there she is, Julia Idison. Now, what about famous immigrants or famous folks from different parts of the world? Talk about who else is buried over at Hollywood Cemetery.
Well, there's a couple. Not so much immigrants from other parts of the world, but immigrants from...
One in particular, though, we want to talk about.
We will get to that gentleman
Sure.
Very shortly. But right next to Miss Idison is Molly Bailey. And Molly Bailey was known as the Queen of the Circus in the 1870s and 80s. She ran a circus with her husband, Gus. When he passed away, she continued to run it till the early 1900s. And then it finally sold it and stayed here until she passed away. She's right around the corner from Julia Idison. But right down the road.
And her connection to the circus, obviously.
It has never been proven,
yeah.
but the Bailey that's in Barnum and Bailey they believe was an offshoot of her circus that was sold in the early 1900s.
Makes sense, but there you go. Okay. And then we need to talk about the other gentleman, a more famous person. If you drive around Houston, I mean, you spent time, in the area. Talk about that a little bit.
Okay. Well, when you go right down from those two, there's just a little short obelisk about 5 feet tall that's in two different languages. It's in both English and Japanese.
There you go.
And it's Shinpei Makawa. Now, Mr. Makawa was a naval attaché at the 1903 World's Fair in St. Louis. On his way back to Japan, he came through Houston, and he noticed that the country was really, really well done for rice cultivation. So he went back to Japan, resigned his commission, and came to Houston and bought a piece of property in a place called Erin, E-R-I-N Station. And everything was going along just fine till one growing season, he was out planting his rice. And, of course, it was manually done. It was all by hand, and they had no real equipment. So they were using mules and large logs to press the rice shoots into the ground. Got his boots stuck. The mules didn't stop.
Wow.
And they crushed him to death into the rice field.
So he's a beloved person in the community. He passes away, Japanese rice farmer, last name Makawa.
And one of the things that he was known for as he was out there was a rail line that ran right down the road next to his farm. When they'd stop, he would go out and take the train engineers coffee.
Yeah.
So they were so appreciative of that when he passed away, they had the rail line change the name from Erin Station to Makawa Station.
And I think it's spelled differently, right? They changed the spelling for the street.
His name is Maekay, and they changed it to Mykawa.
But it's a beautiful marker, and it's noticeable because it's in Japanese and in English. And, that was a big trend, in the 1900s, 19-teens, bringing over, a Japanese that had technical knowledge of how to do this and teach the farmers in the area and kind of, grow the business. So we love hearing that story. So that's three really important folks over at Hollywood Cemetery. You'll learn more about that's in the north side of Houston, by the way, the Fulton area. Let's talk about what are we looking at here, and then what is this connected to?
That is the chapel at Forest Park, Lawndale. And it is spectacular.
I think so.
You walk in and you don't think there's a whole lot out there when you actually walk up to it. When you walk inside, it is all marble. It is so well done. There are two Tiffany windows, and they are confirmed as Tiffany's.
Yes, they are. Louis C.
In
Tiffany.
two of the vaults. You've got folks in there. Red Adair is buried in that chapel. So is William Ward Watkin. So is John Henry Kirby.
Yeah.
And it's just a very small but very, very, very beautiful chapel.
And it was built about 1923 or
22, 23.
Yeah, okay. The first interment is actually 1921, November of 21. So it makes perfect sense that about 22, 23 they built an abbey. And from what I'm told, it's the first public abbey in the city, so that people are able to be buried there that don't have to buy the whole space. So it really is pretty inside. And then throughout the property, there's other famous folks that are buried out in Forest Park, Lawndale. Name a few of them that are kind of all throughout the space.
You've got Jim West, Silver Dollar Jim from down towards the coast. Let's see, the Manils.
Yeah, arts patrons Dominic
and it's really kind of unusual when you look at their graves. You would think, well, they built the Manil.
Yeah.
They have two bronze headstones,
very
flat
modest
stones, about a foot by two, and that's it. And rumor has it that she wanted it that way because she didn't want to distract from the museum with people coming out and look, with a large mausoleum or anything for her.
And this is the second largest cemetery in Texas. Forest Park, Lawndale by acreage is the second largest. The largest one is in Dallas. But it really is a peaceful place, and it's open, dusk to dawn to really just drive throughout. What's interesting about Forest Park, Lawndale, too, is that it has just variations of statuary. It's all different levels, and there's some newer cemeteries built around the 1940s and 50s where they only required just these flat four, brass plates and things of that nature. So at least you get to see a lot of different things in this space. And then now this chapel.
That chapel is still at Forest Park, built about 1967. The state at that time, up to that time, had a law that a company couldn't own both a funeral home and a cemetery.
On the same property, yeah.
Yes. So in 1966, they changed that law. In 67, Forest Park put the first chapel up that was actually in a cemetery in the state of Texas.
And it's beautiful. That iconic A-frame, you can see it from miles away. It really is a pretty piece on that flat bayou. And of course, it borders Braves Bayou. That's a common feature. You'll often see a lot of these cemeteries by water features. You have obviously Buffalo Bayou by, Glenwood and things of that nature. So you'll see that a lot throughout. It just seems like that area is good. Now, speaking of another Buffalo Bayou, we have another park/cemetery. Where are we at now, and what's the connection to cemeteries here?
We're right across the street in Sam Houston Park. And this is really a building that was moved in, so it doesn't have a cemetery with it here. It did in its original location. But it's actually sitting where the original Christ Church Cemetery, not Cathedral at the time, but Christ Church Cemetery was founded in 1850. The church felt that they needed their own, rather than go to the city cemetery, so they built their own. Well, 5 years later, in early 1856, the first Masonic cemetery in the city, and actually one of the first in the state, the Peter Gray Lodge Cemetery, was built just to the north of that. And actually, the way the property lines were, and of course, you're talking about the 1850s. There was not any GPS at that time.
Yeah.
So you have overlap between the two cemeteries. Sometimes you think you're in one, and actually the grave is in the other. That's where Anson Jones was in the Masonic Cemetery here. Mrs. William Morris Rice was in the Episcopal Cemetery. She's now over in Glenwood, as is Anson Jones. They didn't move those two cemeteries until in 1939 they moved the Episcopal Cemetery.
So what we're talking about is, again, this is where the Masonic Cemetery was.
Up
and
closer to the street.
About over here, okay?
Yes.
And then here's where we had the Episcopalian Cemetery on this side over
To the
here.
back.
To the back.
They actually backed up to each other.
Okay, there you go. And there's St. John's Church. I need to do a little plug for St. John's Church. Allison Bell will be happy about this. This is one of our most popular rental sites. I just got to say this, 1891 St. John's Church. It's beautiful inside. And what's really neat, too, is the German congregation that donated the church back in the 1960s has a clause where they're able to do their annual Christmas celebration service in the church. So they're going to be here this year, too, with Mass on and enjoying that space. But you can actually rent that out, which is really neat. But here is the current property. Now, what happened to the Masonic, cemetery? What was built there? It was kind of a neat little space.
In 1959, the city finally bought it.
Okay.
Bought the cemetery property, disinterred the ones that were there, and put up a parking lot, and the Houston Fire Alarm Building was originally built on top of it. Mm-hmm. When that was torn down.
McKee and Camrath, beautiful mid-century building that again was built right about here. Okay. But now in 1988, they discovered something eerie, right? I mean, something happened in '88.
Well, when they were doing the Newhouse Fountain,
yeah,
they were actually excavating for the Newhouse Fountain, and they found a coffin. And one of the reasons that that's probably a case is because the ground there has been raised several feet over the years to accommodate the parking lot, to accommodate the fire alarm building. And where they happened to be, it was fairly low. So when they dug down, all of a sudden they hit an iron coffin. And they called out the state archaeologists, and we did some things to it. Turns out that it is a Bringhurst daughter. Those pot metal caskets were only done for about 6 years, 1862 to 1869. The Bringhurst daughter died in 1868, and she was 7 years old at the time. And where she was on the plat map is the Bringhurst plot in the cemetery.
And this map, you created this map with your years of research, and you lay it over the actual current day Sam Houston Park, which really, it's a transparent map, so you can't see it. It's too delicate, and we weren't able to scan it in, but you can kind of get an idea of it. And like I said, you're wonderful to lay it over the property so we can really get an idea. This, of course, is looking out to the south. This would be, to the north over here. Mm-hmm. There's 45 elevated, and that's the park.
This right here will be Episcopal, and it actually extends all the way to the bio edge.
There it is.
The back half of it, this section, the Episcopal Church decided that they would have a place where people who weren't members of the church and only needed maybe one plot, one space, could purchase that and be buried there. So that area is called Stranger's Ground.
Now, let's talk about some African-American cemeteries and other cemeteries that are around the area, because they do exist, and it's really a neat little time capsule for a different another community being laid to rest over there as well. Talk about some early African-American cemeteries here in the Harris County, Houston area.
Well, the oldest one is Olivewood, which is off of Washington Avenue. It was about early 1890s was when it was originally formed. Although there's actually a burial in there that says it was 1862, so they believe that she was moved in. There is College Park, which is right down on West Dallas, and it's named College Park because right across the street from that, John Henry Yates had founded the Houston College for Negroes. And so they felt like that right across the street where the cemetery was going to be would be they would call it College Park. He wasn't buried there until about 1905. He was moved from Olivewood because Olivewood was the wrong religion for him, so his family moved him over to College Park. You also have Evergreen Negro Cemetery over on Lockwood.
Yeah. You
have...
I always find what's interesting about Evergreen, there literally is, and this just shows you, there literally is a street that runs right through it, and then there is a freeway that runs on the northern border of it. It's really kind of sad that because that land was all a cemetery at one point, and to have a street going right through it, is interesting. I'm sure they had to either move some bodies or look at that, though. But these cemeteries, in the early days, maybe 30 years ago, maybe 20, they weren't really well kept. We've seen kind of a trend, right, in the last 20, 30 years of descendants coming together to really take care of these cemeteries.
There's been a very good push to do that. Just to give you an idea, College Park was an absolute jungle back in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, to the point that because of the way state law was written, they had to have the property declared a public nuisance in order to even be able to go in and clean it up.
Wow.
They had thought that the city would be become the caretaker of it like they are founders. They were wrong. Mm-hmm. So right now it is maintained by the association that was formed to actually
and I think that's best, for it to be a nonprofit organization made up of descendants and community folks that care about these cemeteries, really, and that are in the area, by the way, for most part, to really kind of take care of them. And we've seen a lot of that happening recently. Too. If you read the Houston Chronicle, Sarah Westcott is working on saving the McDaniel Cemetery, which I talked to her about too. And it's a little pocket cemetery not too far there off of Fulton. It's off of Jensen right over there. So it's a renaissance happening. We want that to occur, right? With more of these pieces of Houston and Harris County history are preserved and saved. There's another cemetery on Allen Parkway that has a very famous person buried there. You might know about that too. It's Magnolia Cemetery. He's got a really pretty mausoleum. Tell people who's buried over there.
Gus Wortham.
There you go, Gus Wortham.
The American General, all of the American General buildings are almost right next door to his grave, and that was one of the reasons he's there. That was his property. He also was instrumental in 9 Bar Ranch, which was a 7-mile front along Highway 290 until they decided they would change it out and make it some of the other properties out there into the housing industry.
And besides the connection to Wortham Center, obviously, with his foundation that contributed that, but that was after his passing, of course, in 87. Still, like, you think of civic leaders, Gus Wortham is one of those major civic leaders that really contributed to our city in the late 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s and so forth, and was one of the original investors in the Waltrip family's Little Heights Funeral Home, right there on Heights Boulevard in 1924.
Mm-hmm.
They infused them with money and really helped to build modern-day SCI, which is what we think of today. So just really, really fun, interesting heroes. What other cemeteries, before we kind of get close to asking our questions and close, other cemeteries you want to make sure we mention or talk about?
Well, there's one that nobody even knows.
Okay.
Because it's only about 4 graves or 5 graves.
I want you to talk about this one because no one knows about it until you really came along and really brought some attention. He's talking about a cemetery. I'm not going to give you the name. I'll let you do the name. But there's a cemetery out in the posh western part of Houston, not too far away from here, the Post Oak area, if you will, that most people had no idea it existed, Gary, until you started doing research and telling people about it. Let audience members know what hidden little cemetery we're talking about.
Talking about the Morris Bragg Cemetery. It's right out off of Post Oak and Sage. It has now gotten its marker, a historical marker, and at least they're going to be saving some of it. But for a long time, they were ready to bulldoze it and start building high-rises.
And there's houses all around it.
Absolutely.
There's townhouses and high-rises all around it within feet of what we're talking about. So I commend you and everybody who worked hard to save that little pocket cemetery. And really, if you think about it, those folks that are no longer with us, they would be proud too.
Well, and there's another one that's even more unknown than that one, if you will, right off of the North Freeway and the North Loop. It's on a residential lot between 2 houses, and it was actually the farmstead for the Erschwitzel family. There's about 5 family graves in there, and the neighbors take care of it. That's how it's maintained. But unless you know it's there, you will never find that little cemetery.
Look at that. And then also on the north side, Brookside Cemetery is a really pretty property out there too. Brookside, right off of Greens Bayou, and that's a space that the Berry family used to have that little farm out there, and that's where Sam Houston is rumored to have stopped during his trek out to San Jacinto. People talk about that. There's a 300-year-old tree there. And there's just a bunch of ones kind of all throughout Houston.
Well, Brookside, too, has the distinction of when they moved the Masonic Cemetery and the Episcopal Cemetery, actually the Episcopal, 124 graves that were in the Episcopal Cemetery were moved to Brookside. There had been some other disinterments earlier than that, onesie-twosie things, that mostly went up to Glenwood. But the vast majority were put out next to the chapel at Brookside.
And speaking of the chapel was actually made, there was a horrible fire with the First Presbyterian Church in downtown Houston, and the bricks, the original stone and bricks from the First Presbyterian Church in downtown Houston actually made their way into the materials to build that little bitty chapel that's out there. So there's a lot of history at Brookside as well. Any other cemeteries you want to mention or talk about?
Inside the loop, Harrisburg-Jackson.
There you go.
That's mostly a black cemetery.
Yeah.
There's a couple of Buffalo soldiers, among others, buried out there, and they also they have a large Hispanic population that is buried to the back of that cemetery as well. It really was kind of like Washington as a really overgrown, derelict cemetery until a gentleman by the name of Christopher Ella went out and started trying to get it cleaned up. And there was a nice little Mexican gentleman who lived right behind it by the name of Mr. Munoz. And when we would take tours out there, every time we went, Mr. Munoz was on his riding lawnmower mowing the grass in that cemetery, and he didn't have to do that. But he said, I don't like to look out my back door and see that high grass, so I'm going to take my riding. And he would go mow everything and clean it up as best he could. He was a really nice man.
Well, shout out to Chris Farella, who's been on our live show, by the way. Chris Farella talked about early radio Houston history on board the live show that we do here. So we do adore and appreciate Christopher Farella, who's the head of the Harris County Historical Commission. He's the chair, and we do appreciate his time in that as well. Well, anything else that we need to talk about before we go to our 5 questions? All right, well, here we go. Lightning round, 5 questions with Gary White. So, Gary, 5 questions of things that we talked about during this presentation. You get to ask 5 questions. What's the first one?
Who has a monument in Hollywood that is in both Japanese and English?
Ooh, what is the name of the person who has a monument in both Japanese and English at Hollywood Cemetery? Okay, we talked about it earlier. Gave you the famous name. You've probably driven on the street before. It was connection to rice farming. That's all we're going to give you on the hints. What is the name? Let's see people chiming in right now. Okay, people are chiming in. Let's keep going. Okay. Next question.
Who was Gene Tierney's first husband?
This is a hard one. Who was Gene Tierney's first husband? Gary White talked about it earlier when we were in the Glenwood area. He talked about it, so you got to know the answer. Okay, for those folks who paid attention, people are chiming in. They're writing in, they're chiming in. Samantha just joined in. Marsha's chiming in. Andel's chiming in. Good job, guys. Keep chiming in. Okay, our third question.
Glendale Cemetery was what before it was Glendale Cemetery?
Glendale Cemetery was what before it was Glendale Cemetery? Okay, we talked about this over on the east side. Did you actually mention what it used to be?
Yes.
Okay, Gary White says he did. He mentioned what it used to be. Okay, so if you're paying attention, are folks chiming in? Okay, look at that. Okay, good job. We got some people chiming in. Okay, our fourth question.
What's the oldest black cemetery in the city?
The oldest cemetery in the city, what is it? The oldest African-American cemetery in the city of Houston, what is it? You mentioned it. It was the first one you talked about when we talked about cemeteries. What is the answer? You're going to chime in. What about our last question?
How many cemeteries were in Sam Houston Park?
Ooh, that's a good one, and it connects where we're at right now. Gary White mentioned it earlier several times. How many cemeteries were actually here in Sam Houston Park? Okay? He said it several times. You should know the answer. If not, go to our website, heritagesociety.org. You can find the answer out there. Okay, Gary White, thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, guys, we do appreciate you being here. Thanks again to Gary White, giving us his time and also sharing knowledge about cemeteries, Houston cemeteries. Thank you again, Gary. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Lastly, a big thank you to you. We always say thank you to all of our staff, Alana, Isaac, Kian, Harrison Funchess, and of course, thank you to Allison Ayers-Bell and Manette Basil, our board chair. Stay tuned, by the way, for next Wednesday's show. We've got with us, we have with us, by the way, Steve Curry. He's going to talk about Houston mid-century architecture in our city. You do not want to miss that out. He's the president for Houston Mod, so he knows it best, and he's also an architect, so you're looking forward to that. All right, and of course, good night. Thanks for being with us. We appreciate your time. Take care, Houston.
Good night.